Hey there, Streakers. Welcome to the Streaking Podcast. Today, we are going to be talking about, Jami and I are going to be talking about something I learned in Supercommunicators, which is a book I just finished reading by Charles Duhigg. And what I learned blew my mind. I mean, you want to know the secret to a longer life and a happier life. That's what we're going to be talking about today. So welcome to the Streaking Podcast. Let's start streaking. What is streaking and why should you do it?
Streaking is how you set up personal winning streaks. Look at who you want to be and what you need to do to become that person. This is streaking.
I'm Jeff.
And I'm Jami.
And we are streakers. Through 30 years of marriage and 7 children, we have learned the power of consecutive consistency or streaking.
To start streaking is simple. You just follow these 3 laws. Make it laughably simple, keep a record, and join the streaking community.
Streaking is your hidden superpower. With it, you will consistently progress and grow in whatever area of life you want.
In this podcast, Jeff and I will share all the fun, exciting, serious, solemn, wonderful parts of family, spiritual, professional, and personal life, and how streaking powers it all.
So join us in the conversation, join the movement, and start streaking today.
I'm excited, Jeff, because what we are talking about, you've talked to me a tiny bit about, but you're going to go in more depth, and I haven't heard it yet.
This one blew my mind. I mean, this morning, what we started with when we were talking about what we want to talk about on the podcast, we were deciding between 2 different subjects, and we got into this one. Mm-hmm. And it was on our walk, which, by the way, those of you who are in the challenge, welcome to the challenge.
Welcome
for
to the challenge.
The Move in May challenge. We completed 1 day of that. While we were out on our Move in May challenge, we were talking about this specific topic of relationships, of supercommunicators. And the book, by the way, I would recommend for anyone.
I know,
it's
I'm
absolutely
read
fantastic.
It.
I think you should.
You've talked about it a lot.
It's really, really good. But what I thought we could do is I want to read, this is in the very end. What is it? The afterword?
Afterwards.
So the afterword.
Like instead of the foreword, the afterword.
The afterword. So Charles Duhigg, who's the author, talks about a certain study. And I'm going to read specific parts of this to set it up as far as what we're going to talk about in regards to relationships. And not only relationships, but what makes life longer and happier and health and being more healthy.
Okay.
So this was a Harvard study that was done in 1939, I believe it was, is when they first came out with it. And it was specifically around young men. Let me just go back to it. 1937. Yep. Billy Grant gave a grant to Harvard to do some research. And what Harvard did is they took and they studied and looked at young men and what brings health, happiness, and long life. Okay. So what this study included was just a whole group of young men that had detailed surveys and interviews that they went through. And what Charles Duhigg does in his book here is he brings out 2 individuals who I'm going to read a little bit so that we have a little bit of background on this. Okay. So among the first of the participants to be interviewed were 2 young men who had enrolled at Harvard in the years leading up to World War II. The first was an undergraduate who researchers eventually determined was a neurotic hypochondriac.
Okay.
Godfrey Camille, one researcher wrote, not too kindly, was a disaster. He had been raised away from other families and children because his parents were pathologically suspicious. When a researcher interviewed Camille's mother, he deemed her one of the most nervous people I have ever met. And a psychologist determined that Camille had one of the bleakest childhoods I have ever seen.
Wow.
Okay, so you get the picture here?
Yes.
All right.
Poor Godfrey.
Yeah, no kidding. Godfrey was at it. When America entered the war, Camille, like most Harvard men, enlisted in the military. But whereas many of his classmates were commissioned as officers and returned home with ribbons and medals, Camille was still a private when he was honorably discharged with no significant accomplishments to speak of. Now, he did go to medical school, but shortly after graduation, he attempted suicide.
Okay.
And so now, I mean, this is everything. So at age 35, okay, he was hospitalized for 14 months for pulmonary tuberculosis. Quote, "I was glad to be sick," he later told a researcher. I can go to bed for a year.
Oh, wow. Okay. So.
I mean, are you just looking at this going, oh my goodness? Okay. Here's the other one. The other young man from that period was different. John Marsden was an exceptional student and came from a wealthy and prominent family that ran a dry goods franchise in Cleveland. Marsden also volunteered for World War II, served valiantly, and then, rather than accede to his father's wishes to join the family business, he followed his passion and enrolled in the University of Chicago's law school, where he graduated near the top of his class. He became a public service lawyer, got married, and eventually started a successful private practice. Okay. So the researchers were looking, they wanted to just follow these people and figure out, what happened to them. So the researchers, they wanted to avoid guessing which participants were most likely to soar or stumble. However, with this, what would you say just right out of the chute?
Obviously, you're feeling like that the first Camille is going to have a rough life.
Yeah.
Obviously started off rough through the war, makes it through medical school though.
Yeah.
But then attempts suicide, which means he was obviously struggling a lot.
Yeah.
But then also interesting that seems to enjoy being hospitalized.
Yeah.
And then the other volunteer,
Marsden. Yeah, John Marsden.
You do expect him to go on and accomplish a lot of things because of the start that he has,
right? And
the things that.
Go ahead.
And obviously, something's going to change here because of the way that it's being set up.
Yes. Okay, so one of the other things that the researchers said about Marsden is that he was one of the more professionally successful members of the study.
Okay, so even though they're trying not to make,
but they're showing both sides.
Okay.
I think they're going to the outliers. That Camille was this absolute disaster, and Marsden was this absolute most professional.
So kind of looking at it and saying, odds are good that Camille is just going to struggle his whole life,
right?
And odds are good that Marsden, who has a lot of these opportunities and things going his way, has the better opportunity of doing well.
Now, the interesting thing about this, the Grant study, in 1954, 16 years after it began, ran out of funding.
Okay.
Grant didn't fund it anymore. No more Grant.
Okay.
And so it got buried in Harvard's basement. Until 1970, so now 20 years later. So 1954 is when it got buried. 1970, 20 years later, young psychiatry professors started digging through those boxes and stumbled upon the project surveys.
Okay.
So they got interested. They expected to find that most participants had kept traveling along the same trajectories as when the study had ended, okay. Right? Okay, so here we go. They found Camille and Marsden,
okay,
and spoke to them directly. It says this. So they're now back. In the intervening decades, it seemed that Camille had become a different person. He was now in his 50s, married, a leader in his church, and had won over Boston's medical establishments by founding a large independent clinic that specialized in allergy treatments. He was a nationally recognized expert on asthmatic patients, invited to symposiums, and interviewed on television. When researchers spoke to his daughters, who were now young adults, they called him an exemplary father, someone who, with the innate ability to just give. He could play like 5-year-olds do. Isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
So Camille says, before there were dysfunctional families, I came from one.
Before we knew how to label them.
Right. He said, at 80, Camille threw himself a potluck birthday party and more than 300 people showed up.
Wow.
A bit later, he let the scientists know that he was flying to the Alps for a climbing trek with his friends. He died of a heart attack on that trip at 82 years old.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Okay, so they said of him, he lived a very simple life, but it was very rich. And you and I had a little bit of conversation about this. Camille, the Harvard researchers later determined, was among the top, perhaps the top, participant in the study by measurement of happiness, health, and satisfaction from life and work. Who could have foreseen, one of them wrote, that he would die a happy, giving, and beloved man?
Wow.
In contrast, Marsden, the lawyer, was in terrible shape when the researchers found him after the study's hiatus. In his 50s now, he was divorced and alienated from his children and his family in Cleveland. Though his law practice was successful, he had few friends and spent most of his time alone. He reported feeling angry, lonely, and disappointed by life. He eventually remarried, but just a few years later reported that the relationship was loveless. Do you ever go to your wife when you're upset? One survey asked. No, definitely not, Marsden wrote. I would get no sympathy. I would be told that it's a sign of weakness. When asked how he coped with difficulty, Marsden wrote, I keep it to myself. I tough it out.
Wow.
Okay? So the question then is, okay, how come the big difference and what led to this? What was it that happened? And so they did, as they were digging through the papers, here's a couple things that they found. Having loving parents made it easier to find happiness as an adult.
Okay.
So that is one of the things. Even though Godfrey Camille didn't necessarily, I mean, his parents were neurotic and very nervous. Maybe they loved him, but
they definitely were struggling with
to
some
help
of their
with
own issues.
Health and happiness.
Mm-hmm.
Possessing genes related to physical hardiness and longevity was helpful.
Okay.
And you and I talked about that.
So that's true. There is truth that genetics makes a difference.
As was getting enough exercise and eating well.
I don't think the world can say that enough. That's the antidote to every problem. Are you getting enough exercise? Are you eating well?
And are you
sleeping well?
Yeah.
Yes.
Education early in life, as well as lifelong commitment to learning, also provided a leg up. However, as important as these factors were, one thing seemed to matter much more than anything else. Okay, so this is everything. This is the moment where I just thought, wow, this completely I've heard it, but for whatever reason, it came alive for me right here at this moment. The most important variable in determining whether someone ended up happy and healthy or miserable and sick was how satisfied they were in their relationships.
Wow.
The people who were the most satisfied in their relationships at age 50 were the healthiest mentally and physically at age 80. Mm. The most important influence by far on a flourishing life is love. Not romantic love, but rather the kinds of deep connections we form with our families, friends, and coworkers, as well as neighbors and people from our community. Love early in life facilitates not only love later on, but also other trappings of success, such as prestige and even high income. It also encourages the development of coping styles that facilitate intimacy as opposed to ones that discourage it.
So what is it in this that you said this was mind-blowing for you? Because it's interesting that they said just before this, it says it didn't come as a surprise. It had been obvious to everyone across the decades as they had conducted their interviews. So discovering that the relationships and how satisfied they were did not come as a surprise to the researchers, it says.
Yeah, which is interesting, huh?
But for you were like, this was mind-blowing for me. So what? It
was mind-blowing because, let me read just a little bit more and I'll answer that question. Because it says, on the other hand, people who had not invested in relationships, who had prioritized their careers over families and friends, or had struggled to connect for other reasons, were mostly miserable. Take John Marsden, for example. When he was 43 years old, with almost half his life in front of him, this is what he wrote when asked by researchers to describe what he found himself thinking about often. 1, I'm growing old. Realize for the first time the reality of death. 2, feel I may not achieve what I wanted. 3, not sure I know how to bring up children. I thought I did. 4, tensions at work are severe.
Wow.
Marsden didn't mention other people or relationships except in a negative sense. When he felt depressed, rather than seek out companions, he went to his office and tried to use his legal practice to distract himself. When he argued with his wife or children, he stomped off and withdrew rather than talking through issues until a resolution or at least an understanding emerged. He was a very self-critical person, said Waldinger, who is one of the researchers, currently leads the Harvard project. he pushed himself hard and judged himself pretty harshly. And that made him successful in his profession. But it also meant he was critical of other people, which is probably what alienated him from so many.
Wow.
So having that, just his way of dealing with the world, I've had these thoughts in the past of, I'll just deal with it alone. I mean, I've even said to you, I don't want to be a burden. I don't want to be a burden to you. I don't want to be a burden to the family. And therefore, I'll deal with these things alone. And when I read this with Marsden and coupled with what was the research as far as the connecting, the happy, healthy relationship, I all of a sudden recognized that by withdrawing, by not sharing those vulnerabilities, by not being open and saying, you know what, I'm not a burden. This is how relationships work. That is actually better towards health and happiness and longer life than anything else. I mean, Camille, this one other thing. During the year he spent in the tuberculosis ward, Camille began developing relationships with fellow patients. He met some for Bible study and with others to play cards, and formed relationships with nurses and orderlies. He later told researchers that his time in the hospital, he felt like a rebirth. Someone with a capital S cared about me, he wrote in one survey. Nothing has been so tough since that year.
Wow.
So it just brought to light this whole idea, and I think that was everything I wanted to talk.
Sorry, just a real quick.
Yeah,
Do you know what the capital S means?
That was just someone he wrote just.
Oh, someone. And that someone with a capital S, like capitalizing someone.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Someone with a capital S cared about me.
So he felt cared about. Interesting. It's also interesting to me that the researcher talks about Marsden by saying he pushed himself hard and judged himself harshly.
Yeah.
And that made him successful, but it also meant that he was critical of other people. I've often wondered if there's a correlation there, that when we are so critical of ourselves, does that also translate into being critical of others?
Yeah. So my question, so you asked me the question as far as why did that stick out to me? And I answered a little bit, but there's one other part of this that stuck out. When I was very early on in our marriage, and I was looking for or setting goals. One of the goals that I had, and you know this, was to be independent of outside sources of income by the time I was 45. And I chased that. And that was something I chased. I wouldn't say like Marsden did, but I did chase it in a way that did alienate me from relationships because of how I pursued it. Not in the same way he did. I did it differently. But what I was aiming for was this idea that if I get independent of outside sources of income, that will allow me to be happy and healthy and allow me to do some of the other things that I've wanted to do in life. And I've had on my belief window that if I can get to that place, there's so many other more things that I can do. When in reality, that is not the case. It's hard to believe for me. It's hard to believe. But real happiness and life comes from the connection that you and I have. Comes from the connection that I have with our children. And gratefully, I've had you around to be able to help me with that. And I now recognize and see, just by this being pointed out, that I have fostered some of those relationships. But in all actuality, many of the ones that could have been lifelong friends, I've allowed to slip away. I've allowed to not be part of my life, which is a detriment to me. And I recognize now, and I said to you this morning, I need to do something that will allow connectedness in my life, not only with you, with our children, but also with neighbors and friends and family and community. One of the things that we talked about is in Georgia, we felt this connectedness because we opened ourselves up to them. And since we moved from Georgia, it's been harder. It's been a harder time coming, and not because of anyone around us, but just because of me. You know, I've thought about, well, I can deal with all of this alone, and it would probably, I've had thoughts of, being alone would probably be better. And not in a detrimental neurotic way, but just in like I've told you before, I don't want to be a burden to people.
And I think that was expressed in your desire when you said, I want to be independent of outside sources. In other words, there was something on your belief window that independence meant that you would have maybe more control. There is one thing I want to read.
Yeah, I'm going to come back.
That you would have more control over the environment and I think as time has gone by, we've both come to realize that connectiveness is super important. I know, looking at my past experiences, there's times that I think having a father that left early in life and not having that feeling of support from that, I think sometimes I've developed a little bit of the thought of, if there's a hint at rejection, I will kind of leave first, and not in an angry way, but more of like oh, that's okay. We don't need to have a relationship.
Isn't it kind of like a self-preservation way?
Yes.
I mean, you're leaving because you feel like you need to preserve.
I'll reject this relationship before you reject me, because I don't want to deal with the rejection again.
Right.
And I love that. Do you mind if I read this?
No,
what he
go,
wrote?
whatever you
So
want.
this is part of what Jeff was just reading. So Camille, the doctor, said, my professional life hasn't been disappointing, far from it. But the truly gratifying unfolding has been into the person I've slowly become. And this was a survey that he wrote at age 75. Connectedness is something we must let happen to us. What durable and pliable creatures we are, and what a storehouse of goodwill lurks in the social fabrics. So I love the things that, one, I loved that he recognized that who he was becoming was a slow process. Mm-hmm. It was, and I think we can become so impatient with that, and we want ourselves to be further down the road than what we are. But especially in relationships, there's time. Time is a huge part of it, and it takes time. And in us being who we want to be, I think embracing moments like what we're talking about today, where you're looking back and you've read a book and allowing what you're reading to open up something inside of yourself to be like, I want to change. I want to become...
and share it with our worldwide
share
audience.
It with the world.
I think sometimes you look at me and you're like, are you really going to share that? You're talking...
Yes,
I see it on your face.
Like,
you're like,
okay.
Okay, I guess
We're going with this. Let's go.
I know, because that's the look on your face was totally like, are you sure you want to tell this to everyone? Is that true? Did you feel that?
Yes.
Like, you're going to be that vulnerable?
But maybe that's what he's talking about, is that it's something we must let happen to us. And I think protecting yourself from that vulnerability and being honest about it allows you to look at it and be like, okay, yeah, I do want to do different. Maybe this idea of independence, and I was looking at that like, wealth will give me the independence that I need so I can feel confident, so that I won't ever be a burden to anybody, so that I won't be hurt, is not true. Truth is that relationships is what gives us those, it's what helps us feel loved, and it's what helps us to love others. And the hard part about it is that it's messy, and that can scare us away. And I look at Marsden, going back to the law practice. He went there because the numbers and the job, he knew what to do with it. It was predictable. He knew how to handle it. People are different. They're not predictable. They're not always, you don't always know how to handle it, and it can be very uncomfortable. And I loved that Camille was like, connectedness is something we have to let happen to us.
Yeah.
And what does that mean? It means not running away from it, not building up the barriers, but allowing the relationship to be a part of our life. And sometimes that means happening to us, like we work through the challenges and we're willing to come back to that thing that was uncomfortable. And I think sometimes it means actively reaching out to those friends, not allowing life to get so busy that the friendships get lost.
Right.
And we do live in a time of great connectivity. But we also live in a time that, because of that connectivity, in a weird way, a lot of people are more lonely and anxiety ridden than they've ever been.
Yeah. And I think that the reason why that is because, am I connecting? So for example, when I'm connecting using technology to you, to others, that is a connectedness. Oftentimes I gauge myself on, can I continue the conversation I started via text with with the person in person.
Yes, in person.
Have you ever noticed that where you're like, oh, well, it feels somewhat awkward sometimes to connect in that way. Mm-hmm. However, I have found that when you and I are talking, like, for example, I know there's been several times I've been coming back from the airport and we're talking and I come in the door and we're still talking, but I transition immediately to you face to face.
Right.
It's not awkward anymore.
Right.
Whereas in the past, it could be, I don't know why, but having the medium of the phone in between us could be awkward in the future. But similarly in text, if I'm texting you a conversation and then we come in and we start talking about it, there's a little bit of awkwardness that starts at first, but we're still connecting. Mm-hmm. Now, the reason that I went all there is because there is a false connecting.
Yes.
And that is in social media. Like, for example, when Chance said to us, well, what was his friend or whatever.
Well, we were at the bus stop and he was talking about this person in such a way that I said, well, should we invite him over and you guys can play? And that's when he told me that he was talking about somebody on social media.
On YouTube.
That was an influencer, not even like a person but the way that he interacted, it made it sound like he was friends with this person.
Right.
But in actuality, they had never met or talked in person or anything.
No.
And I think that's part of so I look at what we do on a podcast. We sit and we talk, and maybe people feel connected to it, but we don't actually.
We connect with each other.
And
but
I'd
love to connect with anyone in our audience. However, It's not a back and forth.
It's not a back and forth, but it's a beginning. I think that I don't want to demonize the technology, because in a lot of ways this has allowed for messages to be out there and for more connectivity to happen.
Right.
But on the same note, I think there needs to be some intentionality behind that. So, for example, a lot of times the way that you find people to be on our podcasts is through LinkedIn.
Yeah.
So you reach out in a connectivity that's through technology to start with, but then we have them and we actually talk to them in person, which is always more fun and gratifying than it is to just.
We have a couple of cool guests coming up anyway.
And then to take it to that next step, to stay connected with those people, even in small ways, makes a difference. So that's what I was saying in the intentionality of reaching out. That technology is a great tool to get us connected to lots more people, but we don't want to stop at the technology. We want to recognize that the whole point of the technology is to be a tool to connect us in real relationships with actually talking to people.
So speaking of connecting, you had brought this out previous to us actually recording the podcast here, and that was my streak to connect with at least one of our children every single day.
Yeah.
And what did you were going to say? I just wanted to prompt you on that.
So here's what I love. This whole podcast has come because of your first streak was to read out of a nonfiction book.
Yeah, read at least one paragraph of a nonfiction book every day, which streak is over 3,000. I have to look, but keep going.
So that's so
3,093 days.
Being able to, that's great. Yeah. Being able to grow from that streak. So now you've read this book that has brought something to light in your life at this time that you were able to see in a way that you haven't been able to see before, which I've always thought is a miracle and a profound gift. If we can actually see things differently, I think that's one of the greatest miracles of life.
Yeah.
And so being able to have that right now where you're like, I am seeing myself differently. And because I see that differently now, I want to change. And what you were seeing differently was relationships. You have a streak to connect with our children. And it's fascinating to me that because you've had that streak for a long time, you've stayed connected with our kids. But in the process of reading this and recognizing, I want to be even more connected with other people, the beauty of a streak is it gives you a place to start. You've been consciously, intentionally looking at the relationships that are close to you and wanting to maintain them and grow them and have them continue through the changes of life. Our getting older, our kids getting older.
Right.
But because of that streak, and this is something I hope I can say effectively, is because it's something that you've been doing for a long time, it now allows you to have what I would call deep growth, to be able to look at it and not to just think, oh, I need to start doing that, but to look at it and say, I've been doing that, but I want to do even more. I want to change at a core level, which is why we so strongly connect the streak to who do I want to be. In the process of doing these things, you've been able to see something in yourself that says, I want to be this kind of person. Therefore, I want to try even harder. I want to do something more to have connections with people, because now that has become something important to me. But foundationally, you've had a streak that has allowed you to get to a place to look at it even deeper. Yeah. And I think that's what's amazing about streaking, is that it's daily, it's small daily drops of things that you're adding, but those things add up. They become experiences. They become opportunities to see yourself differently, and opportunities for us to truly and slowly become the people that we want to become better than we were when we started.
And I believe that slow growth means lasting growth, because you said you do it slowly. Sometimes I think I can be discouraged by that it's slow, but the slow is the opportunity to get deep roots.
Yes. That's really well said. I like that. Deep roots.
A couple more things from this, and then we need to finish up. This has been such a great topic to discuss. I can't believe we're already at 30 minutes. Back to Charles Duhigg's in the book. He says, across the decades and surveys, similar findings emerged again and again. The happiest participants called others regularly, made lunch and dinner dates, sent notes to friends saying they were proud of them or wanted to help them shoulder sad news. Most of all, happy participants engaged in many, many conversations over the years that brought them closer to others. Quote, through all the years of studying these lives, one crucial factor stands out for the consistency and power of its ties to physical health, mental health, and longevity. Reads a 2023 summary of the Harvard data. Good relationships keep us healthier and happier, and in many instances, those relationships were established and kept alive via long and intimate discussions. Put differently, connecting with others can make us healthier, happier, and more content. Conversations can change our brains, bodies, and how we experience the world.
That's great. Conversations can change our brains, our bodies, and how we experience the world.
Amazing, huh?
Yes. Thank you.
So I wanted one more highlight just before. I wanted to pay tribute to my mom. So she died October 31st. And she was one of the happiest, healthiest people that I know. And I didn't always do a great job as a son celebrating her and what it was she did. But when I read this, I realized that her health and her happiness came because she was connected. She had so many friends and so much family and was not afraid of deep, meaningful conversations. So I just wanted to pay tribute to her and hope that when I see her again, she forgives me for my foibles and that we're able to be connected again.
I loved your mom. And she had the most beautiful funeral because of all the connections that she had. So many people.
Yeah. So thank you for joining us today. We would love to hear from you about maybe a time that you connected with someone or felt that relationship that helped you through or you saw brought you happiness. Please email me, Jeff, Jeffrey @mystreaksapp.com or
Jami @JAMI@mystreaksapp.com.
Thank you for joining us today. We hope that you have a wonderful, magnificent, awesome day. Keep connecting with people, and as always, keep streaking. A better you.